Right, hello everyone, welcome again for our third and final workshop. My name's Ellie, if you're new and this is your first time here. I'm an architecture student at the University of Sheffield. This event is part of the Commonplace Beauty project, and this project's been made possible by generous funding from TAP and the Arts and Humanities Knowledge Exchange, who are funded by Research England and the Office for Students. None of this would be possible without them, and we're incredibly grateful for all of their support. The Commonplace Beauty project has been created by writer and artist Helen Angel, who's going to tell you a little bit more about it now.
Thank you, Ellie. Yeah, I'm Helen Angel. I write poetry and non-fiction primarily, but I've obviously got a really strong passion for imagery and photography in particular, as well as creativity in general and its power. My original aim for this project was to encourage people to look and find the beauty around us, especially in places that might traditionally seem to be unbeautiful or unfashionable. And I wanted to create a celebration of life and an appreciation for the moment that we find ourselves in, as well as where we are. And I wanted to support this new way of looking with practical guidance in the form of 3 workshops that would build towards the creation of an online gallery of photography, as well as a digital publication of photography as well. And we're obviously getting a significant number of contributions for that, and which we're incredibly grateful for. Now, I knew I needed a photographer who understood what I was trying to do, as well as someone that I really admired and someone that I knew people would find both accessible and really inspirational as well. So I was just delighted when Richard said that he would deliver the workshops for us. Ellie already mentioned that the Commonplace Beauty project is supported by TAP, funded by Research England and the Office for Students, and this gives people the opportunity to work with a placement student with the intention of exchanging knowledge, which we've definitely done. And none of this would have been able to take place had it not been for Ellie's hard work and just the skills that she's brought that I just don't have. So I am just enormously grateful to have a placement student of that kind of calibre to collaborate with on this project. So without further ado, thank you for being here again this evening. I hope you enjoy the event. Now I'm going to pass you back to Ellie, who's going to be hosting this evening.
Thank you, Helen, that was really lovely. So in terms of protocols for this evening, we really want this to be inclusive. We do ask that you keep your microphones off during the talk, but we'd love you to keep cameras on. We're recording the event, and the link to the recording will be on our social media tomorrow. If you have any questions or issues, pop them in the chat, and I'll also be checking the emails as well. Helen already said we're really excited that Richard agreed to join us and to lead these workshops, and they've just been brilliant. Richard Davis was born in Birmingham and took up photography after leaving school in the early 1980s, a passion which has dominated his life ever since. Moving to the northwest of England at the end of the 1980s, Richard has become well known for his social documentary work as well as his first love portraiture. In more recent times, Richard has had his photography exhibited in London, Manchester and Berlin. His work has also been featured heavily online via the British Culture Archive, and he has several books recently published by respected photography publishers Cafe Royal Books. Richard talks should last about 35 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes at the end for our final Q&A. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Richard Davis.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Helen. Welcome everybody to workshop 3, post-production, a photographer's craft. And this one will be my final talk in the series of the 3 workshops. But what I wanted to do before I started workshop 3 is just briefly recap on workshops 1 and 2. If you remember, if you listened to workshop 1, that was all about my time in Hume in Manchester in the late 1980s, early 90s, where I documented the area using a traditional form of photography, really, 35mm with an SLR camera, and using a darkroom to develop and print all the images that you saw, everything printed onto photographic paper. Now, workshop 2 was a more up-to-date version where I used a digital SLR camera, and I chose all 5 of the photographs were in colour, and obviously edited using a computer rather than a darkroom. So really that brings us up to workshop 3. And if you remember, we also briefly looked at composition, didn't we? And how photography really is about the art of seeing the world, and how we choose to compose what we see via a camera, or indeed a phone camera. But it's important to realise that really taking the actual photo is only really half the job. And this is what I'm going to talk about tonight in terms of post-production. Now, most of the post-production that I'm talking about tonight is via various photo apps, or even the settings on your phone camera if you've got a phone camera. And I think many people don't realise really just how important this kind of like editing role is in terms of producing a photograph. Quite simply, it can really turn a good photo into a great photo. But it is quite time consuming, and I think obviously the more you put in, probably the better the result you'll get. But I do realise it's very subjective tonight, and obviously I tried to work out, well, how am I going to talk about this? What do I talk about in terms of trying to explain things to anyone listening in? So what I'm going to do really is share with you really what I do with my photographs, and the decision making and choices I make when editing my photos, and hopefully you know, I mean, it could take that, in theory that could take all evening, but we've got to try and whittle it down to 30 minutes. Okay, Helen, could I have the first image please on the PowerPoint? Okay. So there are so many apps available now out there, and I'm not going to go through all of them here, but if you were to Google photo apps or free photo apps, you'll be amazed at what can come up. But what I've done here is, again, for the purpose of workshop 3, I've highlighted this is what I use on a laptop or my computer. So I have 2 systems, hence the choice of 5, which some of you might think 5, does he need 5? But each one of them actually does different things, or I use, I mean, the best one at the moment for me is the Canon one, the Canon Digital Photo Professional Volume 4, which I got free with my Canon Digital SLR camera. Now, I'm also aware most of you listening in tonight won't have a computer or a laptop with an app, but you'll have all your photos that you take are done via a mobile phone. So the next image, Helen. Okay, so I'm going to talk again about my, using what I do as an example, and the phone I have is an iPhone 7, and this is the option that even a phone camera allows you. So you've got so much variety you can do. You can alter exposure, brilliance, highlight, shadow, contrast, and as we go all the way down. Now, the only thing I can suggest you do on something like this, if you're not too familiar with what these are, take a photo on your camera phone and really go through each of these options. And what these options normally give you is a sliding scale of 0 to 50, or in a plus or in a minus. And the only way of really learning this is to just trial and error, and look at what the results give you and work out the style that you like. I think the only thing I can, strongly suggest what you do is to try and find your own style. There's no right or wrong with this. We've all got our own personal tastes. I mean, again, I'll go through various things tonight about how I view things, the pros and the cons. But really, it's up to each of you to work it out for yourself, what you like doing, and what kind of settings you like. I mean, you know, don't think I use all those settings. Most of them I've never ever touched. Contrast is important. Saturation is important as well. Now, the saturation can sometimes reduce the colour. And another thing briefly before I move on, while I remember, in some cases, if you alter, say if I was to alter the contrast, particularly on a colour image, that automatically then alters other things like the saturation. And I think that's to bear that in mind. Sometimes certainly a disadvantage to a lot of people editing on a phone camera is that they increase the contrast, but they also make all the colours look slightly unnatural. And I'm particularly thinking green grass. Green grass sometimes can look really false looking if you're not too careful. So in some cases, if you're up in the contrast, make sure you knock the saturation down a touch. And again, my personal taste here is, with the digital technology and all the options we've now got with the photo apps, I really try my best to try and keep as realistic as I can to the actual image I photographed, and not go too much into fantasy, which a lot of people do out there, photographers or people on social media. Now, again, that's personal preference, but for me, really, I don't want to stray too far away from a realistic looking photograph, and I think this can be a downside to a lot of the photo apps, with how some people use them. And one other thing briefly before we move on to the first image, sharpness is an interesting one in terms of digital photography. I think a problem so many people have nowadays is they make the photos too sharp, and again, it can end up looking false looking. So just be aware, and like I've said before, the only way of working all this out is to experiment and to go through all these settings and look at what you're happy with, what the numbers are, how far you can go up or how far do you reduce, and it's trial and error. Right, okay, let's move on to our first image, please, Helen. Okay, so this is my original, this is Preston bus station, and this is my original photo. Now, the beauty of the apps is it can give you many options in terms of cropping, converting colour to black and white, to burning in the sky only, to burning in the foreground, which helps lead the eye in. It can alter perspective. If you see, there's a slight little line to the far left, which is a bit distracting. There's also a big dust mark on this original image. So that was my original photograph, and this is what I decided, this is how I converted it via a photo app, Helen? So in this case, I decided to go black and white, and I got rid of the dust mark, and I slightly moved the perspective to get rid of the distracting line on the edge of the photograph. I slightly darkened the sky in certain parts only, and I really upped the contrast. Now, by upping the contrast, that really highlighted the lines of this image, and also made the white a little bit whiter and the cloud a little bit whiter, and I felt it give it more of a power to the color original. And it black and white, I mean, this obviously, again, there's so many arguments for black and white and full color, and what the two can give you, and they are very, very different. But what I will say is the golden rule with what I do is I always keep the original, never delete the original. So in a lot of cases of a photo I'm really happy with, I'll have several versions of it. Also, bizarrely, what's happened to me in the past as well, sometimes I've actually got in say 5, 10, 15 years on, I've actually gone back to the original and not liked what I actually altered about it, or had another go but altered it completely different to the first time around. So it's worth bearing in mind that your tastes and your attitudes can change in time. So always keep your original photograph, because at some point you may go back to that and start again, start afresh. But in this case, I chose deliberately to go black and white for the power of the image, and especially because the sky was just perfect that day, and it really made the photo for me, really. So let's go for my second image, please, Helen. Sorry, yes, we're gonna, yeah. So that's just having a quick look at the original and the black and white. So as you can see, you can completely change the appearance of an original photograph, which you know, in the old days when I used a darkroom, we never had these options. We never ever had these options, and so it's so liberating, actually. I you know, that's not to, I do love the darkroom, obviously, and I still go in a darkroom and work with 35mm, but this is something that digital really you can't not, because what I feel now is you have total control over an image and what you want to do with that image, whereas before in the past, editing via a darkroom is so highly skilled and difficult that you can't get that utmost control you can get via the photo apps. So that's worth mentioning. Okay, let's move on to my second photo. Okay, so this is photo 2, and this is my original photograph, and this is the Mancunian Way, the watchtowers of Mancunian Way, as I used to call them. They were there for a number of years. Sadly, they've been pulled down again now, so they're no longer there. I was lucky again. This is weird, the story with this. It's a Sunday, and Mancunian Way was shut for the weekend for maintenance, and it coincided with a glorious Sunday in terms of weather and light. And I got up early Sunday morning and sneaked on to Mancunian Way, and I walked the length of this. I took a load of photos that day, but this is why you're wondering, what am I doing in the middle of the road in Mancunian Way? And the road was shut, but you know, I was lucky. Okay, so this is what you'll see in a minute why I chose this image. So Helen, could I have the next, right? Okay, so I've kept this originally. When I used the photo app, I decided to keep it colour, but I bumped up the contrast. And I also highlighted the foreground a little bit more, and I reduced the colour in the foreground. And I think that emphasised the shadow a little bit more on the trees. And I also changed the perspective as well. And I didn't completely straighten, but I upped the perspective, which kind of like brings the image more to you. And the blue sky was a bluer than the original. I also highlighted the a little bit of the white on the building as well, just to give a bit more detail, because when you contrast, sometimes the whites go a little bit whiter and can burn out. But with like a setting on one of the Photoshops, you can increase exposure on a certain bit of the image only. Now, in some way, I've chose this image because I decided to do a black and white version of this as well, because I sometimes can't decide whether a colour is better or a black and white is better. So also bear that in mind when you are using apps and are looking at trial and experimenting with different settings. Don't be afraid to do several different versions. And definitely in some cases, I can't choose whether I prefer black or white and colour. If you ever, I think is, no, the next one is the two of them together, isn't it, Helen? You go, let's go for the next one. Yeah, sorry. So this is comparing the original and then the improved colour version. And like I said, I shoot in both, Mark, is the answer to that. Right, Helen, can you go to the next image? Right, okay, so that is the black and white version, and I still to this day can't decide whether I prefer that the new color version or the new black and white version. They both have their pluses to me, so that was worth bear in mind. Sometimes, you know, do different versions and just keep everything, keep the original, like I said, and you know, just trial and error, and you know, it's all good fun. It's all enjoyable, good fun. Okay, let's go for photo. Right, okay. So this is my original photo. Now, on workshop 2, I think one of the questions was, what was my favourite weather condition or season? And I love photographing in mist. But if you notice, the mist completely condenses colour, and it completely reduces like the spectrum. So again, it's worth bearing in mind all the different scenarios you can get with your original photograph, and to adapt to it in terms of how you use your photo apps. So in this, there wasn't a lot of colour in it really, but I like that it kind of like catches the mood of the mist. However, what I did want to do is kind of like highlight the caravan a little bit more, and kind of like make it stand out a bit more from the rest of the background. Now, again, do you remember when I spoke in workshops 1 and 2, most of what I do is with a wide angled lens. And again, it's so critical when you're taking photographs is to work out where you're standing. Are you close enough, or do you need to step back? And in terms of a photograph like this, you need to put that caravan in a context of the conditions of the day. So hence, I've stepped back quite a bit and got a lot of background in with the trees and the mist and the road and the brick wall. But so right, if Helen, do you want to move on to the changed version? Okay, so that is what I ended up with using a photo app. I slightly brought the image nearer to me in terms of perspective, and I then highlighted all the caravan, and I lightened it a touch, and I put the contrast up a touch. Now, with the foreground, the road, I deliberately knocked out a little bit of the colour on it to make it a little bit more black and white, and the same with the brick wall. So what I was effectively doing is trying to make the caravan stand out more from its background rather than the first original. Actually, let's go to the next. That's it. Okay. So if you can see there, it just highlights that caravan a little bit more from the rest of that background, but it still keeps that mist and fog and the mystery of that wonderful sky and the trees that fade. But sometimes it's worth bearing in mind as well with apps. Sometimes it only pays to be subtle with it, subtle with the changes. Don't change too much. Don't be afraid just to change certain things or you know, and then that, I mean, remember that's going back into what I said before about trying to keep things real. Don't turn things too much into fantasy or falseness. Just because you've got all those settings, you don't have to use all of them. But again, like I said, it's a case of trial and error, and over time, trusting in your instincts of I guess, your style, develop a style, and you know, you'll know yourself really how to use these apps eventually, and how far you can push things and not tip them over a certain way where sometimes things can just look false and in some cases can ruin a really good original photo. Okay, we're on 3. Where are we up to time wise? Okay, let's go for image number 4, please, Helen. Right, this is interesting. So I've put this one in because this is really, I'm going to talk about cropping now. And also whereas the previous photo, I was talking more about subtlety and subtle changes. The other side of that really is being quite adventurous. And this one, I've been quite adventurous. So I've got many projects on the go with my photography, and one of them was photographing in Manchester at the moment, and it was looking at old and new buildings together, and how the redevelopment of Manchester is going in the last few years, and in some cases, you know, it's fascinating the mix of buildings, old and new, you can get in a photo. And I did this photo, and obviously I love the birds. And I looked at it, I thought, oh God, that's rubbish. I don't like that. It's not worked. It's hard to go, well, I don't like it. And I put it to one side for quite a couple of months, really. And one day I was looking at it again and I thought, why don't I crop it? Why don't I completely crop this image? I know, cut it in half. Helen, next thing, there you go. So I decided to cut it in half and get rid of my original intention. And I put it into black and white, and I focused on the birds, and I focused on, I guess, the old Manchester. And it completely changed the image. You know, from that horizontal original, I've now made it vertical and I've cut it in half. So don't be afraid to go down the road of cropping. Now, cropping is something you will have on a phone camera as well. And also, as well as those settings you saw at the start of the workshop, you've also got settings where you can convert an image from horizontal to vertical. So there's many options available to you, and I guess it's just fun going through things, and you know, sometimes things don't work. Well, so what? Just delete it. It doesn't matter. Or, you know, sometimes if you do completely go another route, it can be wonderful. And I was so pleased with this, and I didn't see this at first. And this also worth reminding you again about keeping your originals. And in a lot of cases, I found this with my photography, that some photographs I took 20, 30 years ago, let me just back slightly, because it might be confusing. In the past, all the photography I did was in the darkroom, printed onto paper via chemicals. However, obviously in the last 10 years, I've downloaded everything. Most of the photos I've taken in a 40-year span, I've now digitalized and put onto JPEGs or RAW images. So when I'm talking now on workshop 3 about photo apps, all those first 5 photo apps that you saw at the start of the workshop tonight on my laptop or on my computer. So obviously I can use those apps on my old photos from 40 years ago as well. It's not just the recent digital images from a digital SLR or from my iPhone 7. So you got this massive options now. And what's interesting is looking back at a lot of my photos from 30, 40 years ago, and you see different things which I never saw originally. And it's probably going to be the same with all the photos I'm taking in the last 10 years with the digital. So like I said, I do stress to keep your originals, because in time, it's amazing how your tastes will change, or how you see things differently in time, and how it's always great going back into images and going down another route with them. And I guess this is an example of this. So this is worth understanding that cropping an image can totally radically change. So bear that in mind as well, because it can give you many, many, many more options as well as changing color, black and white, contrast, knocking down the strength of the color, vibrancy, sharpness, etc., etc., etc. Okay, let's move on to next. So yeah, just quickly. So you see how different those two images are. And I could easily have just give up on that original, but I kept it, and thankfully months on I went back to it, and that's what I ended up with. Okay, let's go for the photo 5. Okay, this is right. We're back on the brutalist architecture, I'm afraid. I had to put this in because this is obviously a reference to my workshop 1 and Hume, and there's a lovely story to this. So this is the Barbican estate in London, and this was taken probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And I'd been to the Barbican before, but only really briefly into the Barbican Centre, and I didn't really get a chance to walk around the housing estate. And I always thought I must go back at one time and give myself a couple of hours and just wander around and go up the stairwells, check all the angles, wander about, and just, you know, take it all in. Because what I've found, this brought back so many memories of my time living in Hume, in the Crescents. And it was a really extraordinary. I was probably there for about 4 or 5 hours, and it was such an odd time, because it brought so many memories back that obviously I was still there in my head from Hume days, but really this really brought them back to the fore, and it was such a strange day, but I was so grateful for it, because it's the closest I've ever got to my time, that crazy time living in Hume, and also it made me think, you know, what could have been with Hume really if Hume had properly been built and maintained and kept. Could it have been another Barbican now? And it would have probably been highly fashionable and highly sought after. And Manchester City Council probably would have made up quite a lot of money in terms of people wanting to live there. But there you go. I love photographing in the around the Barbican. Classic lines everywhere. That concrete, that texture, the shapes you would get, the lines. So with this shot, because of the Hume connection I had in the past, where all my Hume was in black and white, if you remember, because I was using film, and we didn't have that option of black and white and colour in those days. You had to pick, depending on what film you put in your camera. And inevitably, with the setup I had in my darkroom, it was always black and white. So, okay, let's have a look at the next image, please, Helen. Okay, so this is putting it into black and white, and I've slightly altered the perspective just to make those lines a little bit straighter, and darken the edge slightly to lead the eye in. Now it's also worth bearing in mind that the original is good as well. I mean, you know, I don't want you to think with a lot of these apps and how I've altered them, I've dismissed the original. Far from it. In fact, some days I actually really like the colour version of this, but my heart really is in black and white with a lot of the brutalist architecture, and especially, I guess, because of my Hume background with how I documented Hume. So I really kept to black and white with this shot, and again, if you remember, time wise, I have to be quick. The little figure in this photo, oh, so good, so good. I was so pleased he was in it, because again, if you remember when I spoke in the previous workshops, there's not many people in my photographs, but those that are in them, I kind of like them in the distance, or to put them small in this kind of like weird setting environment. And I did not set up this photo. I'll stress that now. I was just, again, like I said, with photography, a lot of it is patience and a lot of it is luck. And I just happened to see this guy. He was probably a worker in the Barbican Centre. He'd just gone out. He was checking his phone and he was just chilling out. I think he was having a cup of tea at the time, and he was just resting on that on how he's resting. And I just thought, yes. And yeah, right. Next, let's look at them together. See, so that again, there's not a lot really in that. I know the original's colour, and actually I like both versions. But there you go. I did feel I needed a black and white version of that. And if you can just see, can you just see how straight the lines are on the black and white one? It's just slightly, only a touch, but it's cleaner. It's cleaner. And I think that's definitely something where a lot of people go wrong, especially when you see horizon lines, when they're slightly tilted. All it takes is you can do it on a phone camera. Just tilt the photo slightly, just clean it up, Get that line straight. Okay, now if you remember, the last image is slightly different. If you remember, I was talking about Hume, and do you want to go on to it, Helen? Go on to the next. Okay, so this is one of my Hume photos from the 1980s. And I was talking about this in workshop 1, where someone had sent me a photo of this about a year ago where they'd coloured it in. And I remember when I first saw it, I was so kind of, it shocked me at first, because I'd grown up for 30 odd years picturing Hume in black and white. There was no sunshine, there was no blue sky. We didn't have blue skies in those days. It was a council estate, completely black and white. And all of a sudden, I got sent this. Somebody sent me this image, Helen. And I just thought I would show you that, because I spoke about it in workshop 1. It was just interesting. I've mellowed over the time with this now. But it was interesting. I thought I would just throw that in at the end. Right, I'm guessing this is bringing me up to my time. Thank you so much for inviting me to do these workshops, all 3 of them. I've really enjoyed doing them. It's not often actually you analyze your photographs, because a lot of what I do really is instinct, and a lot of the time I just don't think. I just know. I guess it's my style. I know what I'm doing, and I've done it for so long now. I don't really analyze. But what's lovely about these 3 workshops is I've got to really, I guess, try and understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And commonplace beauty is such a wonderful idea that Helen has created. And really, a lot of what we photograph can be seen as I guess, ordinary or common. But really, the idea, I think, of what we're doing and what Helen is doing is making the ordinary extraordinary. Okay. Thank you all, and thank you everyone for listening in to the workshops as well. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Richard. Ellie's going to lead the Q&A now for us.
Yeah, so I thought I'd be cheeky and start with my own question. I just wanted to ask Richard, have you ever not edited an image at all and just left it as it is?
Yes, but very rarely. I tell you what, I thought a recentish one from a couple of years ago. Again, do you remember when I was talking about that golden hour before sunset, and the sun is quite low, and if you combine that with stormy skies in the distance, and all of a sudden, because the sun has got so low, it's got through the cloud and it's shining on these dark clouds and there was one in Manchester. And again, funny stuff. I have favoured, remember I was talking about favoured locations and always knowing what's good and where. And I knew there was a great location in Manchester, and it was near the Mancunian Way, and it was looking into town with all the new buildings and all the cranes and all the old chimneys and all the new glass buildings. And it was exactly where the sun was shining on, and it was exactly where all the rain storm clouds were behind. And I remember I knew you don't know how long the sun's going to be out for, and I was probably about 5 minutes away, and I ran, and I was thinking, oh, am I gonna make it? And I just made it in time to take a few photos before the sun went behind the cloud again. And I remember getting the images on my laptop, and I didn't have to do a thing with them. You couldn't do anything with them. You couldn't alter them. It was perfection. You couldn't make the clouds darker. You couldn't make the colours more intense because the low level sunlight and that golden hour, you couldn't improve on it. The composition was bang on. So I just left it. No, so yes, rarely you can just leave it. But probably I'd say only 10% of the time, if that.
That was a great story. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We've got one from Philip, and it is, to what extent do you pre-visualize the end result at the time you're taking the pictures?
Oh, that's a great question. That is a great question. You know, I know what recently, which makes me laugh. More so when I guess I do a little bit of street photography, or I've documented a lot in COVID in the last 18 months. A lot of street stuff and people and mask wearing and signs and billboards and this crazy world we've been living in. And what's made me laugh recently is you can see photos developing minutes before they do. I guess that comes with being obsessed with photography and looking at the world as if you're looking through a camera. And it's almost like a chess player planning the move, you know, 3 moves down the road, or a footballer knowing what pass he's going to make before he gets the ball. You can kind of like, your mind is constantly thinking, and I think sometimes now I'm very conscious of composition when I'm taking photographs now, because I know how annoyed I can get sometimes on the photo apps where it's difficult trying to get what I want to do. So each time that happens, it lodges in your brain. You must be bloody better at the time of taking the original. Think more, or count to 10 sometimes, and don't rush. And knowing what's distracting, and working at, oh yeah, that's a good one. What I have done a lot recently is litter. Sometimes that odd bit of crisp packet or can or cigarette papers or anything white, it's worth kicking out the way. Kicking out the way or removing, because inevitably it will be a distraction in your photo, or take away the eye, take where the eye's going. And yes, you can get rid of that via an eraser thing on a Photoshop. But again, you learn over time to make life easy for yourself, and to do that when you're taking the original photograph. So I certainly think a lot more only when you've got time. Obviously, sometimes in photography you haven't got time, and you've got to catch that decisive moment, and you've got little time. But in a lot of cases with what I do, I actually do have time to think about it and to make sure there's nothing distracting. Look at how the light's falling. Like I said, look at where you're standing. Do I need to crouch? Do I need to get higher up? So, yeah, but again, I think over time that becomes instinct. And I know certainly with portraiture, when I do my portraits outdoor, a lot of the time I just need a minute or two to think, and then I'm in straight away. I know what I'm doing, and I know where I want people to stand and how to stand and what backgrounds to use. And that just comes with 40 years of photographing, I think. Okay, next question.
Kevin has an interesting question. do you take photos for your own satisfaction, or do you have potential viewers in mind?
I take it purely for my own satisfaction, because you'll only end up tripping yourself up if you start to think about what other people are liking. And I tell you what does annoy me in photography a little bit: formulas. And a lot of photographers out there feel they have to go with formulas and what to photograph. And I think I try my hardest to avoid that. Not always successful, but that is my role, really, to try and not be too predictable with what I photograph. You know, keep to my style, be aware of my style, be aware of what I like. I always set myself projects, and I've always got about 5 or 6 projects on the go all the time. And but what's hard with social media, really, sometimes in social media, I really try my hardest not to be influenced by what other photographers are doing, because I think that can dilute your what you're trying to do. And that's not to dismiss other photographers, God no. But when I was a freelance photographer for a while in the 90s, and I was photographing for other people or newspapers or magazines, actually that I lost quite a lot of interest in photography a bit, or I didn't really enjoy it as much. So I know now, I think I'm in a really privileged position at the moment, because I've kind of like got quite a bit of recognition for my work now, and I guess it's been on my terms, and I'm just going to continue with what I've always done, and not really think about what other people like or what other people would want me to do. I think that's important, and hopefully people just like what I do. Good question, that.
Stuart has a question. People or inanimate objects or buildings, is one easier, or do you prefer one?
Well, God, see, this is I in all these 3 workshops, I've not touched on any of my portraiture work. So this is really the other side of my photography, the non-portrait side. And again, you know, I like to not give myself any boundaries, really, and just go, don't really go down, like I was saying, with formulas and you know, I just, no rules. Should be no rules. I just like photographing what catches the eye. As I've got older, I've liked photographing buildings, to be honest. I didn't do that much in my 20s and 30s. It was mostly music photography and portraiture. I think as I've got older, I've got really into architecture and buildings, and then creating strange environments, and then like I said, putting these small figures into these environments. Although I still love my portraits, and one of the projects I'm doing now is a new series of portraits under the Mancunian way, and most of them are in colour. And I wanted to do that because I did a lot of portraits in black and white in the 80s using the Mancunian way. So I've done like an updated version, and it's radically different again, I guess, because I've used I've purposely used the new portraits under the Mancunian way on digital. Yeah, good question, Stuart, as well. That.
So this might have to be one of our last questions, but Philip's asked another one. Do you draw a distinction between street and documentary work?
I think people categorise me more as a social documentary photographer, and I think I'm happy with that. I think with street photography, I don't do it as much because I tend to think, again, it's a little bit more of a formula. And I guess it's not really my style, although, you know, I do love great street photographers, but I don't think you can describe me as a street photographer, to be honest. I think I would probably say there's more of a political angle to my photographs, and that has been ever since the 1980s and the Thatcher years. And actually, it was the miners' strike that really got me into photography. Actually, it was a major part of making me pick up a camera. Was originally seeing a lot of the photographs taken during the miners' strike. And briefly, quickly, there was that famous photograph of the police, the copper guy on the horse with the truncheon going to hit the woman photographer. I think it was in Sheffield. Was it in Sheffield or Yorkshire? Rotherham way. That just
probably
that image. Wow. Two images that really got me into photography quickly: the Joy Division one that Kevin Cummins did on the Hume Bridge, and the miners' strike photo of the truncheon hitting the woman photographer. Powerful images. So I guess, no, I'll be a social documentary photographer and more of a political angle, because I feel it's more positive than being classed as just a street photographer. I hope that's answered your question. Right, how are we doing for time? Are we any more questions? Battle of Orgreave. Well done. It was. Can I just mention one other thing? I've forgotten something quickly. Digital photography. Your downside is don't make the images too sharp. Look at the photo by Penny Smith, The Clash, London Calling album sleeve. That's photography. Okay. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Richard. So I think that's all we've got time for. I can't believe our 3 workshops are finished. I hope you've had a lovely evening, and thank you again for joining us. If you have any feedback, we'd really appreciate it. You can pop it in the chat or let us know on social media. And also, if you have any photographs that you'd like featured in our online gallery, you can submit them using our email address, or there's a link in our social media. There's just over a week before the deadline. I just want to end by saying a massive thank you to Helen. None of this would be possible without her, and without her passion for celebrating the everyday. And it's so nice that we're all together and enjoying that and looking confident. And then also, we all need to say a massive thank you to Richard. Underpins everything we've been trying to do with this project, and has invested so much time in creating these brilliant workshops. I'd really love it if everyone would be up for taking, going off mute and turning their mics on and joining me in a clap for Richard and a round of applause just before we all. So, thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.